Breaking news, fresh off the presses. There's a pretty seismic shift that just happened over at Bungie. Now, if you've had your finger on the pulse a little bit, you probably know that something's been up over there. Basically, there was reporting earlier this year that they were really short on projects that were really generating the revenues that they needed to. They were missing revenue targets and profitability targets by 50%. They were really struggling to find any success. Now, they had a recent expansion to Destiny 2 that did really well, I'm told, but on the whole, they've been struggling recently. And they just announced that Bungie is spinning off a new sci-fi action IP into a new Sony studio, and the studio itself is laying off 220 employees as it moves to make, quote, substantial changes to cost structure. The team will also be integrating further with Sony, merging roughly 155 roles into Sony Interactive Entertainment. Bungie will continue to make great games. We still have over 850 team members building Destiny and Marathon, and we will continue to build amazing experiences that exceed our players' expectations. And this is the full post. So this was rumored that this was going to happen for a long time, because basically what happened is Sony bought Bungie for like $3 billion, right? But when they bought them, they came in and said, we're gonna put this money up. We own you, so we get the revenues and profits and all that, but you are going to remain independent so long as you hit these milestones. So as long as you're hitting those milestones, you're good. And you can keep your managers, you can keep your structure, everybody keeps their jobs, everything's good. But if you miss any of these targets for a consistent period of time, we take over. And Sony will step in, fire people, get rid of these managers they don't like, and do it the way they want to do it. And it looks like that's what happened. It looks like that trigger was met, and Sony stepped in and is now making some heads roll. Because, I mean, the initial announcement that they're laying off 220 people, it's like, okay, maybe that's how they're going to hit the profitability targets, that they're going to just lay people off to get there. But then you find out that they're integrating into Sony Interactive Entertainment, and they're spinning off a new sci-fi action IP into a new Sony studio. It's like, okay, PlayStation stepped in. It was like, we're taking control. Honestly, it's kind of surprising it took this long, because they took over Bungie. They took them over 2 years ago. Yeah, they announced it was going to acquire in February of 22. They completed the deal July 15th of that year. So 2 years ago, almost on the nose, is when they bought them. And a lot of other companies, if they buy a company, they just buy the damn company. They step in, they clean house, they do what they're going to do. But Sony gave them the chance to basically be independent, and they would just be the corporate overlords that write the checks. But obviously that didn't work out. This is an artifact, though, of the Jim Ryan era. I've given Jim Ryan a lot of crap over this generation, because I don't think he's a gamer. And now he's gone, but I don't think this guy was ever a gamer. I don't think he ever really cared about gaming. I think he was a corporate shark who climbed the ranks and then ended up in this position. And so his whole goal was to maximize revenues and profits however he could. And the way he wanted to do that was by going and cranking out live service games. And part of that came from forcing single player studios to make live service games, which is what we've seen, even, ridiculous amounts of time, years and years and years, and millions and millions and millions of dollars being wasted on stuff like the Last of Us Online project that never is going to release. It's just a total waste of time. And then the flip side was by empowering, is the term they use, their current live service studios to make bigger and better games that push the boundary, and then also acquiring new live service studios that can continue to push it. Bungie was one of those purchases for $3.7 billion that has been, according to investors, a colossal failure. They've had a couple of decent expansions, but the whole point of buying a Bungie was because they wanted that, to own one of the biggest and most profitable live service games in the world. Destiny is big. it's not that profitable when you look at the whole life cycle on a yearly basis. Like they might have one expansion pop off, but then they have 2 or 3 mediocre releases or whatever, and players leave and then come back for the next good expansion. It's not printing money, right? So they spend $3.7 billion on that, and it's largely been nothing. Like nothing's really come of it. Beyond that, what else did they buy? They bought another studio, and they bought this studio after seeing the game that they were working on. You know what that studio was? Firewalk. You know what game they're working on? Concord. They announced April of 2023. Great news! Firewalk Studios is joining the PlayStation Studios family. Learn more about this talented team and their plan to connect players in new and innovative ways in their ambitious upcoming multiplayer game. What's funny is like new and innovative ways. What about Concord is new and innovative? Like what? But anyway, they say Firewalk Studios will join the PlayStation family to create, quote, a AAA multiplayer game that will, quote, help grow our live service operations. Firewalk Studios was founded in 2018 by former Activision and Bungie devs Tony Hsu and Ryan Ellis. Hsu was in charge of Destiny business unit back when Bungie was still an Activision studio, while Ellis was the technical art director and later creative director for Destiny at Bungie. The studio is full of ex-Bungie and Activision devs with experience working on the Destiny and Call of Duty franchises, but also veterans from Apex Legends, Mass Effect, and Halo. They saw Concord and decided to buy them. By some accounts, for 200 plus, somewhere between $200 and $300 million. I know. So they did that. They've also doubled down on other live service projects that make even less sense and look somehow even worse. For example, they bought this was back in 2022, another studio called Haven. Sony closed its acquisition of Haven Studios, the Canadian developer co-founded by Ubisoft Toronto and Motive Studios founder Jade Raymond. PlayStation Maker agreed to purchase Haven for an undisclosed fee back in March, and in a tweet posted earlier today explained the deal has finally been ratified. Ooh. So you see, they went on this purchasing spree back in like 22, 23. Well, what's Haven working on? You're like, what is this, Luke?
You want to know about us? Seems like everyone does these days. It's simple. Too much money and too much power is held by just a few people. And it's only getting worse. So, we decided to do something about it. Let's go.
Designer socks too, I got the swag crew. It's a haiku, I'm something like you. Might drink and drive too, work 9 to 5s when I was in high school. These shoes here don't come out till June. This my pick, I'll crop you. Married to the game, said my I do's. Got a window seat like Erykah Badu.
So they spent most likely hundreds of millions of dollars on that too. They looked at that and said, oh yeah. This is why I think it's totally likely that somebody like Jim Ryan was welcomed to leave, because I think the writing's been on the wall. I think they're doing like internal testing. They're sending these trailers out, gameplay previews and stuff to people, maybe influencers, maybe just regular gamers. But I think they're doing all of this stuff behind the scenes, and they started to see that nobody was resonating with this stuff. Nobody wanted it, and it was all gonna flop. Even now, we can see that something like Concord is going to be a colossal flop. You just can't have a successful live service game with like 1,000 players globally. It just doesn't work. The math doesn't math. It doesn't work. So I think they see this coming from a mile away. They've known this for a while, that it was going to be received like this. And so basically what's happened, I think, is that they had somebody in the decision-making chair who was so out of touch with gamers that he thought this is what they wanted. He thought that this Fair Games, he thought that Concord, he thought that all these projects were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To put it in perspective, like, what did they say? I think The Last of Us Part 2 cost like $200 million roughly. They could have had another Last of Us grade game. They could have had another God of War Ragnarok. They could have had 3 or 4 of those for this same price point. It's ridiculous. And all of this has just been wasted. All of this time, all of this crap has just been wasted for really no reason. I mean, they've got nothing out of it. It's the running joke on all those Suicide Squad videos that I post where people are like, wow, Luke, you've made more money off Suicide Squad than they have. And like, it's half joking, but it's also true, because if I make even a single dollar off of a Suicide Squad video, because I didn't spend any money really making the video other than, I guess, technically paying Jacob. So maybe we say, like, if I make a few $100 on that video, covering all my costs of production, I've made more money than they did after spending $200 million on it, because they just totally overshot how many people would actually be interested in this. But they've just blown it. They've just blown it. Now, I've seen some people that are like, oh, well, this is all just a grand scheme for tax write-offs. Like they intentionally are releasing games like Concord or a Fair Games eventually, or a Suicide Squad. They intentionally put them out there because they want them to implode. They want them to do badly so they can write it off. But here's the thing. Like, I think people just don't understand it. Like, people hear, oh, write it off on your taxes, and they think it's like free money. All writing something off on taxes means is that it's discounted at your tax rate. So, like, if you have $1,000, you could spend that $1,000 on something, or in this case, a failed project. You get nothing in exchange for that $1,000, but you don't have to pay taxes on that $1,000. So you basically saved, if you have like a, let's just say 30% tax rate, corporate tax rate, it's like actually 21, I think. But either way, even if it's 21%, you just don't pay $210. So you sort of saved that money, but you got literally nothing in exchange for it. You wasted the rest of the money. You would much rather have the whatever $790 in your bank account, having paid taxes on it, than having nothing to show for it and no money, but you sort of saved. Like, it just doesn't, that's not how numbers work. You know, that's not how math works. But all of this to say, I think there's not a grand conspiracy here. I think the old saying that comes to mind is never attribute to malice or some grand scheme or controversy, or conspiracy rather, that which can be adequately explained by incompetence. So never assume that something is part of a grand conspiracy if it's also just as likely that somebody was just an idiot and made a series of basic mistakes. I think it's much more likely that Jim Ryan just was so out of touch and had no idea what the young people wanted that he thought he could spend billions of dollars on these types of games and projects, and that people would like them because, well, you've seen how successful Fortnite is. Jim Ryan doesn't sound like that, but he's British, so I'm going to keep doing it. Like, I think he was just so out of touch. He just didn't understand what his own customers wanted. And as a result, they're suffering for it, as they should. But now they're trying to find their way out of this pit because they've dug themselves into a pit, and it's going to be tough to find their way out. Because in this time, you notice, of course, Xbox has come along and they've purchased a couple of the biggest live service producers in the world. They've bought Blizzard, and they bought Activision, and they bought King in one big old deal. And just that has been responsible for 40-50% increases in revenue year over year. Like, it's wild how much money something like Activision can generate. But in that same period of time, they've also acquired a lot of other single player studios, and studios that are working on some really promising single player stuff. I know, like, people who are PlayStation fans will be like, no, they've got nothing, no games. It's fair to say so far they have not steadily dropped like consistent quality titles. I totally agree with that. They have to show that they've earned excitement and hype, because so far they've got some promising stuff, and the trailers look good, but they haven't dropped consistent, 9 out of 10 games at this point. Once they start doing that consistently, then people will sit up and be like, okay, when we see a really promising trailer at an Xbox show, it's okay to be excited. In the same way that if you see Santa Monica Studio come out with a trailer for something, it's fair to be excited for it because they've demonstrated time and time again that they know what they're doing and their games are high quality. So they'll eventually get there. But a lot of these that they've shown in here, barring the cinematic trailers and stuff, have a lot of potential, and I think a lot of people are really excited for. And so they have huge live service ambitions and amazingly powerful IP at their disposal. And they also have been cooking all of this stuff at the same time. And that's, honestly, at this point, PlayStation doesn't really have anything directly to compete with it. We do know that they probably have something for next year. Almost certainly. They have Ghost of Tsushima 2 or some other single player game, and they probably have a PlayStation 5 Pro that they're going to be putting out around the same time, if not later this year. A lot of people are expecting them to showcase the PlayStation 5 Pro at the Tokyo Game Show, and that's in a matter of months. So I think we're going to see stuff like that relatively soon, but PlayStation is now, shockingly enough, kind of playing a wee bit of catch up to the Microsoft momentum, because the whole problem for Xbox so far has been we've got these holes where for like a year and a half we have nothing. That was it 21 or 2022 that they literally didn't have anything. They just didn't have a thing. That doesn't work. You can't do it. There were those leaked emails during the FTC hearings to acquire Activision Blizzard where they were talking and Phil was emailing his team and being like, we can't do this. Everybody needs to be honest about their timelines. Everybody needs to be honest about where the game is, how much time they need. We cannot have these huge gaps in releases. So they kind of pushed it off. They're like, okay, the next few years are going to be pretty empty and sparse, but come 2024, late 2024, we're going to start doing the steady drip. Every like 3 to 6 months, we're going to have another AAA grade game. And they showed that in this showcase. They have a ton of stuff. Not all of it will hit. A lot of it will probably end up being kind of bad or even mediocre, but a lot of it also is probably going to do pretty good. And that's where like Microsoft will actually start to compete. Right now, of course, on the console side of things, they are hemorrhaging users, but that's also because their approach is not really to try and play the console game. Amazingly enough, now they're trying to push this. You're right. You're right. I totally spaced Death Stranding 2. So they do have that next year. So Death Stranding 2, probably Ghost of Tsushima 2, and maybe a like shadow drop something or other. They probably also have fair games coming next year, most likely. But the point of all this, though, is Sony bet big on the live service push. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on some acquisitions, billions on others, and they have, as of right now, had one success in the form of Helldivers. And that was one of their lower effort endeavors. It's kind of funny. The less hard they try, the more successful they've been. And I think you're going to see them continue pushing, like to try and recapture some of that Helldivers success. And I think you're seeing it with Concord where they're pushing like $40 for that, even though nobody's going to pay $40 for that game. But they found a little bit of success here and there. They've gotten a taste of that live service money. And ooh, baby, is it sweet. But they need to figure out the rest of their crap. And they're doing that by totally restructuring Bungie, laying off 220 employees, integrating and merging 155 roles into Sony. It's a pretty seismic shift. They say we still have over 850 team members, so they're laying off like a solid 20% of their workforce. That's crazy. Yeah, 17%. This is the official post. This morning, I'm sharing with all of you some of the most difficult changes we've ever had to make as a studio. Due to rising costs of development and industry shifts, as well as enduring economic conditions, it has become clear that we need to make substantial changes to our cost structure and focus development efforts entirely on Destiny and Marathon. That means, beginning today, 220 of our roles will be eliminated, representing roughly 17% of our studio's workforce. These actions will affect every level of the company, including most of our executive and senior leader roles. Remember what I said earlier about Sony stepping in and cleaning house and putting their own people in charge? That's what that looks like to me. They stepped in, said, okay, yeah, you guys don't know how to make this profitable. We're going to figure it out, kicking them to the curb. Today is a difficult and painful day, especially for our departing colleagues, all of which have made important and valuable contributions to Bungie. Our goal is to support them with the utmost care and respect. For everyone affected by this job reduction, we will be offering a generous exit package, including severance, bonus, and health coverage. I realize all of this is hard news, especially following the success we've seen with the final shape, but as we've navigated the broader economic realities over the last year, and after exhausting all other mitigating options, this has become a necessary decision to refocus our studio and our business with more realistic goals and viable financials. This is one thing to remember. You can have one really successful quarter, but that doesn't mean that your year was successful, right? That's a different question. I appreciate that they're doing health coverage, bonuses, and severance. That's great to hear. My dad was actually laid off relatively recently, and it came as quite a shock to him, of course, because they were just like, yep, sorry, bye. Just out of the blue, out of nowhere. So not every company will do this type of thing. Not every company will try and help you on the back end. Some people will just kick you to the curb and be like, bye. It sucks to suck. But I'm glad to hear that they're actually supporting people on the back end, which is good. I did see some of these posts about a lot of this stuff where there were other layoffs made. People are like, wow, they made billions of dollars, and they point at like revenue numbers. And then flip it and like, wow, they made, like, what was the recent layoffs that were announced, or a studio closure or something? And people are like, wow, they made so much money, but they're laying people off still. It's like, guys, there's a difference between revenue and profit. You can have $100 trillion in revenue, but if your costs were $100 trillion, you didn't make any money. Like, you still lost, like, you didn't get anything. You didn't technically lose anything in that case, but you didn't gain anything either. And if anything, you lost money through opportunity costs. So it's not always as simple as just looking at revenue numbers on Twitter. But beyond that, they say we're committed to 2 other major changes today that we believe will support our focus, leverage Sony's strengths, and create new opportunities for Bungie talent. First, we are deepening our integration with Sony Interactive Entertainment. Damn right, Sony's getting deep in there. Working to integrate 155 of our roles, roughly 12%, into SIE over the next few quarters. SIE has worked tirelessly with us to identify roles for as many of our people as possible, enabling us together to save a great deal of talent that would otherwise have been affected by the reduction in force. So basically, Sony is going to scalp a lot of the talent, and they're going to work with Sony and then go back and forth with Bungie or something. I don't know. Second, this makes it sound, so they're eliminating 17% of their workforce, and then they're integrating a further 12%, because I don't think this 12% is part of that 17. So it sounds like they're getting rid of 220 jobs, or 17% of the workforce, and then they're going over the next few quarters to put another 12% of the workforce and move them over to Sony. So when all is said and done, about a third of Bungie will be cut. That's what it sounds like to me. About a third of Bungie will either have been fired or will be working within Sony and not within Bungie anymore. Oof. Oof. Second, we are working with PlayStation Studio leadership to spin out one of our incubation projects, an action game set in a brand new science fantasy universe, to form a new studio within PlayStation Studios to continue its promising development. An action game set in a brand new science fantasy universe. I mean, I'm guessing it's another live service game if it's coming from Bungie, but maybe it's not. Who knows? This will be a time of tremendous change for our studio. Let's unpack how we ended up in this position. It's important you understand how we got here. For over 5 years, it has been our goal to ship games in 3 enduring global franchises. To realize that ambition, we set up several incubation projects, each seated with senior development leaders from our existing teams. We eventually realized that this model stretched our talent too thin too quickly. It also forced our studio support structures to scale to a larger level than we would realistically support, given our 2 primary products in development, Destiny and Marathon. Additionally, in 2023, our rapid expansion ran headlong into broad economic slowdown. a sharp downturn in the games industry, our quality miss with Destiny 2 Lightfall, and the need to give both the Final Shape and Marathon the time needed to ensure both projects deliver at the quality our players expect and deserve. We were overly ambitious, our financial safety margins were subsequently exceeded, and we began running in the red. This is what Sony pointed out when they were like, hey, you've missed your financial targets by as much as 50%. Again, that would be if you expected to generate $100 and they bring you 50 instead. Like, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Like, that's rough. Jeff Grubb just confirmed that Herman Hulst runs Bungie now. Yeah, he stepped in, kicking butt, dude. Oh, man. After this new trajectory becomes clear, we knew we had to change the course and speed. We did everything we could to avoid today's outcome, even with exhaustive efforts undertaken across our leadership and product teams to resolve our financial challenges. These steps simply were not enough. As a result, today we must say goodbye to incredibly talented colleagues and friends. This will be a challenging time at Bungie. Bungie will continue to make great games. We still have 850 team members, blah, blah, blah. We're going to support our people. Okay. All this just sounds like during the COVID years, because you say 5 years, so you rewind the clock to like 2019. What's happening in 2019, 2020, 2021? Interest rates plummet, money becomes really cheap, debt becomes super cheap. A lot of these companies start to finance huge expansions and projects and stuff that they wouldn't otherwise finance and kick off. But they do it because money's cheap and money's basically free at that point. So they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. They do that thinking that they can turn these huge projects into multiple successful live service games, and then they flop. Or if they don't flop, like some of the expansions for Destiny 2, they just get stuck in development hell because it's not that easy to just quickly throw together a like top of the genre game. So then they end up in a position like they did in 2023 where interest rates have spiked. All of a sudden, if you want to finance the expansion of certain teams, if you want to finance the development of certain projects, because they don't have a lot of money flowing in anymore, they don't have a ton of cash on hand, they have to finance a lot of this development cost. All of a sudden, that's really, really expensive. So then they're trying to figure out how the hell they do this. It doesn't actually work because, again, like if you've tried to buy a house in the last year, you probably know this. Buying a house at like a 3% interest rate, all of a sudden you can afford like a $750,000 house or whatever it is. But at 6% interest, you can only afford a $300,000 or $400,000 house. And you're paying like the same amount. Nothing's really changed, just the interest rate has changed, and that totally skews how all of this works. It's a similar thing on the corporate scale when if you are financing a project with high interest debt, that project has to turn a lot of money around on the back end to be profitable, because part of the expense of development was not just how much you spent developing the game, it's also the amount of interest you paid on the debt you used to actually do the project. It's why having a big papa company like Microsoft can be so powerful, because you don't need to finance your development costs. You don't need to finance any of that crap because you have a behemoth in the form of Microsoft that can just throw money at you if you need to. And now you're seeing the sort of ripple effects of all of those decisions. Embracer Group is another great example of somebody that expanded way too quickly and suffered as a result. And Bungie seems to be another example, which is just, I mean, it's really, really too bad, but this is what happens. I mean, you play with fire and your executives make bad decisions. This is what happens. Jason Schreier says Sony's Bungie is shrinking from 1,300 people to 850, 220 laid off, 155 moving to Sony, 75 going to a new studio. Quote, we were overly ambitious. Our financial safety margins were subsequently exceeded and we began running in the red, says the CEO. Really, really bad. Really, really bad. But we've seen the writing on the wall for a very long time. This has been rumored that this was going to be the outcome for a long time. And this is what everybody was afraid of was going to happen, but now it's actually happened. So there you go. We wish all those Bungie devs the best. Hopefully they land on their feet. But furthermore, hopefully Bungie can figure their crap out so they don't end up totally going belly up. He took my thing.